Hi, I'm PJ from TreeLineUSA.com. Welcome to wood carving. We're excited today to teach you a little bit more about wood carving tools and to show you some of the ideas of things you might want to get started with to do some of the projects you have in mind. There's so many different knives, so many different gouges, and a lot of information out there, but today I want to kind of help wade you through some of that information to kind of help you feel better about your initial investment. So let's get started. As you can see, there's a lot of different carving tools to choose from as you get started. To kind of get your basics though, what we normally recommend is a good knife, a couple of gouges, something to sharpen with, safety like a glove and a thumb guard, and then of course your wood carving, your wood to get started. And so let me kind of break this down a little bit. First, there's a lot of different shapes and sizes of knives. So as you can see here, there's small, more detail oriented knives, and there's some that are more rough out oriented knives. And so a lot of times when people first get started, a little bit shorter blades, say like this 1 3/8 or up to maybe about 1 7/8, a blade like that is very manageable for people when they first get into it. And so there's other knives that are a little more specialty, like these roll cut knives that allow you to kind of roll out of a cut a little bit easier because it's thinner up here towards the top, or like this 1 or 2 1/4 inch knife, which has some great length to it, still a fine enough tip, and a lot of meat back here when you've got to remove some material. So it's a great blade for removing a lot of material in a hurry. But a lot of times to get started with, a little bit shorter blade is a little more manageable for people. Now let's talk about gouges. So gouges, there's a lot of different shapes and profiles, and each gouge will make a different texture. So a knife can be used for a lot of different things, but the gouges will make textures that are unique that a knife just usually can't quite make. And so typically when people are categorizing the different gouges, they call them by a number. And so like this one, for instance, is a number 3. Flat chisel would be a number 1. That just means that the profile on it is perfectly flat, where a number 11, like this one right here, is very U-shaped. So 1 is flat, 11 is like a horseshoe, and so then you have several different numbers in between. So as you can see right here on this number 3 gouge, you have just a slight curve to it or slight sweep to it. And then the higher that number, like a number 5 or a number 7 or a number 9, you can see that it just gets gradually more curved. And so those textures will get deeper and deeper. When you're carving, typically you don't want to carve any deeper than the wings on your tools. And so depending on how much of a scallop type texture you might need will determine the gouge that you want. And so some of these, for instance, so when you're calling a gouge by a certain name, this will be a number 3 1/2 inch. And so that just means that from here to here it's going to be a 1/2 inch wide, and number 3 sweep, meaning it has just a slight curve to it. So, and then you get into like your V-tools. And the V-tools, of course, have different angles. This is about a 60-degree angle here, and a 3/8 inch. So it's about 3/8 inch at the widest point. And usually, you get away with using one V-tool for a lot of different cutting. So here's a 1/4 inch right here, but as you can see, as you go down, the size is about the same. Even though the V-tool gets wider up here at the top, the bottom of it is about the same size, as long as the angle is about the same. The V-tools are incredibly handy for kind of outlining some of your work. So if you're trying to do some relief carving where you want to outline your project, you can see the V-tool just allows you to come in and gives it, allows you to kind of drop the background by turning this to the side, drop the background down while leaving what you want high. You can also use it for cutting in textures, like hair texture, fur texture, and different things like that. A number 3 gouge, again, remember it's kind of just a slight sweep to it. Something like this will leave a very flat profile. So it's great for kind of skinning the wood or kind of smoothing it where you don't want a lot of scallop type texture. And let me just go to a number 11, which is very deep, and this kind of gets in there and gives you some great scallop type texture. So depending on what you're carving, you may want to have some of that hand-hewn type chisel marks in it, and the deeper gouges will certainly do that. So we've talked a little bit about gouges, and I'll make a recommendation here in a minute on maybe what I would get to get started, because you definitely don't need all of them to get going. There's a few tools that we use all the time, and there's a few others you might use for very specific projects. So then let's talk about gloves and safety. So anything's better than nothing, but typically if you're right-handed, you're going to wear a glove on your left hand. And this glove right here is made out of Dyneema. We call it the Red Armor glove, and it also has stainless steel woven into it. But this way, as long as when you're carving, as long as the blade can kind of catch the fibers, it should stop or really slow down, you know, getting cut. Most of these gloves are not going to stop a direct puncture type cut, but as long as you can kind of catch some of the fibers, this is going to save you a lot of band-aids and time. And so this goes onto the hand you use for holding onto your projects, and then that way it kind of helps protect in case you were to slip off or if the wood breaks. On your right hand, or your knife hand we call it, you do wear a thumb guard. And this is a simple protection against when you do your back cuts. And Boy Scouts always taught us never to cut towards yourself, but in carving you cut towards yourself quite often. But that way it kind of helps protect your thumb. I mean, typically you want to drop your thumb below the wood, so as you're cutting it glances off without even hitting the thumb guard. But this way, in case you forget and leave your thumb up high, it's going to hit into that leather rather than into your thumb. So again, that'll save you a lot of band-aids. Now let's talk sharpening. Sharpening, there's a lot of different ways to bring your tool to a good sharp surface, a good sharp edge. And so as you watch other videos and things, you'll see a lot of different methods on how to do it. But what I like to use, as long as the tool is good and sharp, all you need to maintain it is just a good leather strop. And so we typically take some polishing compound, rub onto the strop, and that kind of acts like your grit or the abrasive that will allow the metal, just small amounts of metal, to come off. And so as you're sharpening, you hold the tools very flat and go away from the sharp edge. So on this one, the dull side is up here and the sharp side is right there. You just go away from the sharp side like this. And that way it doesn't dig into the leather. You go back on both sides. Now as you're carving, or excuse me, as you're sharpening, oftentimes people have a tendency to roll the bevel. So as they're coming into it, they take and they roll it like this. When you roll that bevel, and you roll the metal to the point, and it makes it a little more difficult to carve with when that bevel is rounded compared to when it's really flat. So I take it and just come straight across and straight up and lift. Some people actually take it and roll the opposite direction just to ensure they don't roll it into the bevel. But I stop and strop my tools out about every 15-20 minutes, and that way my tools never get dull and they just stay good and sharp. And carving's fun when you have a good sharp tool. Sharpening gouges is similar, but just a little bit different. And so with that, what we do is we use the Flex Cut slip strop, and let's grab a number 7 gouge here. So it kind of has a slight curve to it. So I rub the polishing compound on the leather surface, and you can do that on a big piece of leather or this slip strop, but just take the gouge and go back and forth like this, ensuring that you keep that bevel good and flat against the leather. Take that and then you flip it over onto the profile that it fits best, and rub your polishing compound onto that surface and knock out any kind of burr that may have been created as you're sharpening the outside. So gouges and V-tools, all of those can be sharpened like on the Flex Cut slip strop. And we have other videos that kind of show that in more detail, but that's really handy for sharpening both knives and gouges, but more specifically the gouges. So the last thing I want to cover before I give a recommendation on a basic carving set is carving wood. The favorite by far hand carving wood is basswood. And there's a lot of different kinds of basswood out there. Some of it's as hard as maple, and some of it is just soft and great to work with. So we're really picky about the basswood that we sell. And so it's really soft and easy to work with. Wood just comes flying off of it. It holds detail, it paints great. But basswood is, like I say, the favorite for hand carving for sure. Some other people will use woods like butternut, sugar pine, aspen, and some other soft woods to work with. But definitely don't go to a home improvement store and buy a block, a 2x4. It's just going to be too hard and difficult to work with. Spend a little extra and buy good basswood, and you'll be grateful that you did. So what would I recommend? Oh, the last thing maybe to talk about would be some way of storing your tools. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that, but we sell some of these different tool rolls that allow you to kind of help store some of your tools, and they are offset so your tools never bump into each other. But I think sometimes people damage their tools by having them roll around in a tackle box or a toolbox or something like that, where a simple tool roll like this allows you to roll up your tools and protect your investment. So that way the tools aren't getting dinged together and having to do a lot more sharpening to get them carving ready. So a tool roll is really handy to use. Now there's a lot of different ways to do that, of course. But so with all the different knives and all the different gouges out there, what most people find to be the most useful, again, would be kind of a shorter blade like this. This is the 1 3/8 OCC Shipley style knife, and we really like that knife because it's a very manageable blade. It's not too long, and then the handle is very simple. And so if you need to, if the handle doesn't quite fit your hand, you could always modify it a little bit by sanding it down or shaping it to fit your hand a little bit better. In time, or if you want to first be able to get a more of a roughing knife, these are really handy too. Just something to be able to take off a little more meat when you need to. But if you're getting one, that 1 3/8 is a great one, and then either like the 1 7/8 or 2 1/4 inch blade would be awesome for a beginner starting set. Then with all the different gouges, the number 9 sweeps are probably the most useful, especially for caricature carving or relief carving, or some of the other projects you may be working on. But the number 9 is a half round tool, and it's great again for doing several different textures on the wood. And a knife just quite can't make a cut like this. So I would get a number 9 gouge, and then I'd probably also get a V tool would also be a very common one. So that 1/4 inch V tool is very useful for outlining, for texturing, and you can make some of this cut with a knife, but the V tool just gives a good clean cut with every pass. So number 9, a V tool, and then a number 11 gouge, and of course those come in different widths. But that number 11 6mm again is a great one. Now, depending on the project you're working on, you might find some of these other tools really useful, but there's something to kind of get started with. That's a great set to get going with. And then as your project dictates or as your project needs, you can always add more to it in time. So a knife or two, a couple of gouges to get started, a sharpening block, either like the knife strop right here for sharpening your knives, but you can also use this for the outside bevel of your tools. The slip strop, something to keep your hand safe, a thumb guard, and then of course good basswood. And that's what I recommend to get started. I hope this has been helpful to learn a little bit more about different carving tools that are available. There's so much to get started with when it comes to wood carving, but don't be confused or overwhelmed by what is available as far as the gouges and the knives. Get started with a good knife, a couple of gouges, a good glove, something to sharpen with, and you're on your way to a lot of fun. Wood carving is just that. It's a hobby that a lot of people can do all kinds of projects with, and it's just a ton of fun. So we at treelineusa.com, we have all these different tools available, some different kits, some different books, a lot of information to help you get started. So even if you don't think you're super artistic, we can help you get started in this great hobby of wood carving. So visit us at treelineusa.com, and for more videos like this, please click subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching.